Hello, I'm Beth Ravello, and I am showcasing today my TE 312 Math Methods 2 portfolio. So to start off with, we're going to open it up, and right here we have our Developing Mathematical Thinking with Effective Questions pamphlet, where this holds a whole bunch of effective questioning that I could use in the classroom. It's laminated, really nice, and has a whole bunch more questions to utilize. And then we also have the task evaluation and selection available here. At the top it says to use these reflective questions as you determine your independent practice activity of the lesson, which I did tried to follow as best as I could when I was creating my lesson plan. And then also in here, I also have the Nebraska College and Career Standards pamphlet, which is also laminated, and it includes everything from number to algebra to geometry and data. So there is a lot of stuff going on, and gives brief explanations, and then also talks about the Nebraska mathematical processes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So then moving on to the first tab, we have number. So we're going to open that right up. And our first chapter is chapter 11, Building Strategies for Whole Number Computation. And we have our notes here, and then we just have more notes that I wrote down and typed up, and just some more notes, a lot of notes and visualizations of what exactly I should be doing with models and whatnot, introducing computational estimation, and just a whole bunch of stuff, like the misconceptions. I added the whole graph in, and then just the whole misconceptions and errors. And then for the e-access activity, I had the looking at collections e-activity. And the reason why I chose this one was because this activity would be really good to use for exploring subtraction strategies, as children should have experienced using a variety of invented strategies for adding two-digit numbers, and for ELLs, reading comprehension is central to this task. So if ELLs have limited English, I can modify the lesson by using the same subject in all the stories. And if their proficiency is stronger, I can ensure that the context are understood. And as for children with disabilities, I can cut the recording sheet into 3 pieces to reduce the visual display, or put one problem on a page. And if children are struggling explicitly, I can suggest the use of a particular strategy, such as an empty number line, but also not while suggesting how to do the problem, not suggesting how to do the problem. Then we go on to algebra. And first up, we have the developing fraction concepts, where we had some notes, and I wrote down on the sides of these, like fractional meaning. Researchers recommend that children have experiences with all the meanings of fractions, and how substantial evidence suggests that the effective use of visuals in fraction tests is important in building children's understanding of fractions. More notes about fractions, and then more notes about fractions with partitioning and sharing tasks. More notes about iterating, and then more notes about comparing fractions, estimating with fractions, and considerations for teaching these, and how following research-based recommendations for instruction provide an effective recap of the big ideas in this chapter, and then the source. And then I have another e-access activity called Pattern Block Creatures, and the reason why I chose this one was because this activity also uses pattern blocks to help children focus on the size of the parts as opposed to the number of pieces of partitions. It also provides students opportunities to continue to count fractional parts, and partitioning and iterating tests are challenging but very effective in helping children understand the meaning of fractions. As a teacher, you are trying to help them construct that fractions are numbers that we can use to count, and fractional parts are equal shares or equal sized portions of a whole or unit. And then we go on to the next chapter of building strategies for fraction computation. And I decided to write my own notes for this chapter, where we go over fraction operations, multiplication. We go over more about fractions, multiplications, area model, linear model, developing algorithms, and then division and the steps of how to divide fractions, and then a summary, and then resources, and then some addressing errors and misconceptions. And then for this activity, for that chapter, I chose exploring fraction multiplication. And it was, where is it? Oh, right here. I said that this activity would be really good for exploring the fraction concept of multiplication. And this activity is best for 5th grade, and visuals can be used. When you have students use a real-life connection or engaging story problem, they see its usefulness while they are engaged. So then I also have some clear ones that once we move it. The next one is geometry. So getting into geometry, we have the developing geometric reasoning and concepts with the PowerPoint slides, and I added my own notes on top of it, like levels of developmental, and more about the Van Heel and the development of geometric thinking, and then more notes about geometry, and then more notes of categories of three-dimensional shapes in geometry and transformations, and more notes about all of that. And then for that EXS activity, we have the shape show and hunt. And the reason why I chose this one was because in shape show and hunt, having children search for various shapes as well as properties of shapes. This shape hunt will be much more successful if you let children look for either one thing or for a specific list. Shapes and properties is the content area most often associated with geometry in pre-K through graded classrooms. And the early grades are the prime time when students begin to perceive, say, describe, discuss, and construct objects in the 2D space. This activity can be modified to accommodate children at the precognition level, level 0, and level 1 by altering the object of the search. And then it also talked a little bit about the mosaic puzzle, which I thought was really creative. So I also decided to incorporate that into my portfolio because I thought I agree that the value of the mosaic puzzle is that the set contains 5 different angles, which could also lead to discussions about informal angle comparisons, groupings of angled measures, and I just thought it was really cool. Then we also go on to developing decimal and percent concepts and decimal computation, where we had some PowerPoint slides given to us, and I wrote my own notes over that as well, such as a serious effort should be made using models and a problem-solving approach. The approach of converting fractions to decimal through division of the numerator by the denominator is strongly discouraged. And then more notes, common misconceptions with comparing and ordering. And then we have more notes. And then for this chapter's EXS activity, I found these 10 by 10 grids, and for this one, it's best for 4th or 5th grade, and it's called Friendly Fractions to Decimals. And the reason why I picked it was written right here, where students are familiar with the 10-to-1 relationship between adjacent digits in our enumeration system. They've worked with decimals and can add and subtract decimals somewhat successfully, but appear to have at least a best procedural understanding of the process. And by using a 10 by 10 grid, they can determine the decimal equivalent for each of the following fractions and what to do. And I just think this would all be really, really great for students to make connections between decimals and fractions, and you can put multiple on a page rather than having one take up the entire page. And then you can also write down the equations right there. So then also moving on, we also have, this blue tab, we go on to data. So moving on to data, I put in here building measurement concepts, and we have the PowerPoint, and I put in my own notes in here as well, complete with sources and examples, like only use a few non-standard units of measure like toothpaste. What a great example. Or how big is a foot, in which book, and the year it was published, in case I ever wanted to go back to that. Quoting the NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And then we have more notes over measurement, an area, more notes. And I thought these visuals did really, really well. So it was kind of hard. And when I did the reading, I found it was somewhat difficult to find any more notes on it when I thought this made up a lot of the gist. And then we have more notes and more visuals and more problems to solve. And I really liked what they had to say. So then for that EXS activity, I decided to use the Changing Units recording sheet. And the reason why I chose this was because this activity is best for second grade, and having students correctly estimate and make conversions is important. This lesson can be tiered with more or less difficult multiples of the original unit, and it uses the second standard for mathematical practices, which is reason abstractively and quantitatively. And then for the final part of data, we also have helping children use data. So I have a couple notes right here, a couple of sources and who said what. And this looks like really empty, but it's just because I wanted this whole thing that looks super duper neat about the process of doing statistics. Like step 1, develop statistical questions, gather and organize data, choose the data analysis plan, and interpret the findings. And then when you go on, you find the common errors and misconceptions in doing statistics and how to help. And I incorporated the entire chart in there as well. And I have more notes about formulating questions, data collections, and some sources that you can use for the 2 different main types of data, categorical and numerical. And more about the collection and classification attribute materials before going on to classification ideas related to social studies and science. So you have more of like an interdisciplinary or cross-curricular where you're making real life connections and they're becoming more engaged. And then you have creating graphs, analyzing graphs, and graphs for pre-K through second children. And then finishing out the notes there for interpreting results, which is the last step in the process of doing statistics, and the levels of questions. And then some more questions that you can utilize. And then reflecting and responding to these questions to be a major focus of your instruction. And then for that EXS access activity, I decided, I found this 1 centimeter grid paper that could help with statistical, like finding graphs or making your own graph. And the reason why I also decided to pick this was that on the inside of this, there is a whole lesson of using data to answer a question. So this activity, when I read over it, I found that it was best for kindergarten through second grade. And in this lesson, students are using data to answer a question. And in this lesson, it can be differentiated between students with disabilities and English language learners, and using personal connections like their favorite foods or numbers or how many pets they have will be very engaging for them and keep them from like disengaging, because they want to know more about themselves and they want to know more about their classmates. And then for this tab, we have differentiation assessment and planning strategies. So moving on to that, it's getting really full. We have chapter 3, creating assessments for learning, where we go over a whole bunch of assessments and interviews and more notes over that, and more notes over rubrics and flexible grouping. And then for that EXS activity, I found question probes, which is more of like a teacher resource and an activity. And the reason why I really liked this was because as a teacher's resource, I like how I can use these questions to probe students to think critically about math, using these as a guide to help guide my students to figure out the answer rather than trying to guide them and then giving them the answer, which sometimes I can tend to do. And then we also have differentiating instruction, where we have all of these notes right here, both written out to the side, and more notes. And then we have the screenshotted table 4.1, converting standard questions to open questions. And I really liked that. I also found another EXS activity for differentiation, was like for team building ideas for the younger grades, like pre-K through second, like team murals, keep it up, or tilt a box. And the reason why I thought those were so great is because it's important to engage students in team building activities and to set expectations that all group members will participate in the group tasks. And this is something that could be used at the beginning of the school year, because having everybody feel responsible and accountable, not only for being part of a group, but also their understanding and learning, will shift my role from just teacher to it could be facilitator as the students grow older, or if I was placed in a older classroom such as 4th or 5th grade, and just having students learn to take even individual accountability would be absolutely great. And then I also have this tab of field experience, where I decided to incorporate my lesson plan, my picture book lesson plan, which was going over volume and rectangular prisms with the Best Vacation Ever by Stuart Murphy. So I have all of the learning goals, the standards, and then I also have it starting on from page 2 to page 3, and then it goes on to the lesson sequence and more of the lesson sequence. Even I have a small portion of the AIMS activity that I utilized, the debrief questions, and the link to the exit ticket Kahoot. And then I had another 2 tabs that I could have utilized, but I didn't know what to use them for. So then I also had started notes for chapter 11, but I prefer to type them up because I was getting some major hand cramps writing it all out. But I did have a lot of notebook paper. All right, so again, we had the 2 excess tabs. We had, find it. We had field experience with the lesson plan. We had differentiation, assessment, and planning strategies. And then in this tab, if I can find it, this is a big tab. This tab was data, and then if we go back just a little bit more, this tab was geometry. I skipped one. And then I also had this tab of algebra, where it included the developing fraction concepts and everything that we've already went over. And then when you go back to the beginning, we had the number tab. which have all of these notes. You can number, and that should be everything inside the portfolio for TE 312. Thank you for coming here to look at my portfolio today, and I hope that you have a great day.